Valley of Saints Sarsen survey. Um, Thank you for joining us and agreeing to be part of this slightly crazy project. We are aiming to go into the Valley of Stones, which is in South Dorset. Hopefully, you're all familiar with roughly where it is. We can go through some maps in more detail later. Um, why are we going to conduct this survey? Well, apart from the fact that Jim thinks it's a good idea, um, there are some there are some very logical and sensible reasons that he thinks this. Um, what we want to do is we want to ascertain where the sarsen stones are in the Valley of Stones, um, and how they're distributed across the valley. Are there different types of sarsen in different areas? Are they on the bottom? Are they on the tops? Are they at one end or the other end? Um, those sorts of things. Um, and we also, because we're archaeologists, we want to try and look at how the sarsen stones have been used by people in the past. Um, so most of you probably know that we found the polissoir. We'll talk about that again in a bit. But have they been quarried? Have they been used to mark out field boundaries? Those are things that we suspect are going to come up. But that also may well be other things as well, or other ways they've been used. Um, and then we're hoping to also apply this then what we learn to the bigger landscape. So there are sarsen stones that have been moved from the Valley of Stones elsewhere, and we can look at the relationships between those two. So, for example, there are a couple of stone circles around, the one on Tennant's Hill or the Hampton Stone Circle. They're made with sarsens from the Valley of Stones. So, by looking at the stones themselves in the valley, we can then sort of also try to understand what was going on in prehistory in the wider landscape. The um, the reason we sort of one of the reasons we came up with this idea was this isn't completely out of the blue. There has been a previous sarsen stone survey. Um, it was carried out in the 70s, and was sort of an early example of citizen science where volunteers went out and they looked at stones in Dorset, Hampshire, and Wiltshire. Um, and they produced nearly 900 records of stones. They were looking over a much bigger landscape than we are. And there's a link there for an article by Katie Whitaker. I can share that article as well if people are interested, and I can share links to a presentation that she's done on the stones as well. Um, so they produced nearly 900 records, but there were some issues with what they did. Um, so different people looked at different areas, and different people provided training in different areas, which meant that there is some sort of disparity across the survey. Um, and their record sheets, so they use tally cards. They call them tally cards. And some of them are brilliant, and some of them are less good. And then parts of each area were not surveyed at all. For example, if they didn't have someone living in the area, or particularly sort of Salisbury Plain area, military ranges meant that there wasn't access. So there's patchy data. Um, they also went out and were, because sarsens are primarily associated with sort of Neolithic and earlier Bronze Age monuments, things like Stonehenge, they're big stones. And as a result, the survey tended to focus upon the bigger stones that had been or might have been used in monuments. They weren't so good at looking at the smaller ones. Um, Now, to move on a little bit to what is sarsen, right? Jim, you might want to interrupt me here
Okay.
if I start tripping over myself, because I'm not a geologist, um, but I'll give it a go. So, sarsen stone. If you've been to the Valley of Stones, or when you go, you'll see that there are these great big stones that are lying in the valley bottom. And when you look at them, um, some of them actually, at first, you might look at them and think that they're concrete, but they're not. It's a fairly unique type of stone. It's a silcrete sandstone, and it's formed by the surface or near surface silicification of quartz, sand, and gravels. So, what I mean by that is a long time ago, around 55 million years ago, um, riverine deposits or rivers deposited the sands and gravels. And then over time, those were silicrated. The sand in them and the silicon became solid basically, and turned them into the stones that solid stones. Um,
It's
this happened. Sorry, Jim, go on.
it's a sort of patchy thing. So basically, you've got big sheet deposits of sand and gravel. It's a river delta. If you imagine something like the Amazon Delta with lots of big stones and small stones and things like that. And then conditions change, and this sort of soup of silica kind of fills in the gaps. But it's really patchy. So some bits get glued together and other bits don't, which is why you've got the boulders the shape they are, because the bits that didn't get glued together wash away later on. So that it was never a sort of continuous bed of stone like you get sort of everywhere else. Like the chalk is just sort of a big sort of long bed of material. Sarsen was always sort of patchy boulders, because it was sort of localized, almost like puddles of silica that glued the stones together, if that helps sort of understand why they're sort of irregular shapes and not continuous. I'll shut up now.
No, thank you for your contributions. Um, so, um, yeah, the Sarsen around the Valley of Stones, in South Dorset, sort of corresponds to the Bagshot beds at Blackdown, and you can see a picture here of the Hardy Monument and the gravels beneath it. Sorry. Oh, sorry. I have. Oh, did I? We're gonna. There we go. Oh, so there's just a map explaining how that geological process is, or where that happened. And yes, the solidification happened over 30,000 years. So you can see that geologically it's quite a different timescale to what we normally think of what archaeologists normally think of. Now, this map shows the distribution of sarsens and the conglomerates relative to the solid geology. Now, you don't need to worry too much about this. It's just you can see how you don't get sarsens everywhere, and how they relate to what's lying underneath. We're not going to dwell on that too much, I don't think, today. Now, sarsen is a really hard rock. It's one of the hardest rocks around. There are 3 different types. So you get the saccharoid sarsen, which is composed of sort of quartz sand grains. And when you take a close look at it, it looks a bit like sugar. It tends to be white and grey in colour. You get the quartzite sarsen, which is really hard, and it's made up of finer grained silts, and is also a slightly darker and a more grey-brown, slightly dirtier colour. And you get the conglomerate, which is also known as pudding stone, and that's the sarsen that really does look like concrete because it's got flint pebbles in it, and sometimes it has quartz pebbles in it within this sort of solid matrix. So it's quite an unusual looking stone because it's a mixture of stones basically. Now, in the past, sarsens were used for several different types of things. It's a very hard stone, so you have to sort of remember that when you're thinking about how it's used and why it's used. In prehistory, it was used for building the big monuments. Got pictures here of Avebury and Stonehenge, which are obviously quite well-known monuments. The stone circle here is the one on Tennant's Hill. The Grey Mare and her colts is made out of sarsen. the Hellstones made out of Sarsen, and many of the other stone circles, the Nine Stones, and down in Winterbourne Abbas, all made out of Sarsen stone, which we presumed come from the Valley of Stones. And then it can be used for smaller artifacts rather than big monuments. This is a photo of a polissoir near Avebury. We've also found one in the Valley of Stones, which was a surprise, an amazing surprise. Did you want to say something about that quickly, Anne?
Yeah, sure. So the as Hayley's been talking about, the Sarsen's really hard, and so what this means is that you can use softer stones on them to polish them. So this is why the Sarsen was used to polish stone axes, particularly at the beginning of the Neolithic. So at the beginning of the Neolithic, which is about 6,000 years ago, the island of Britain was really heavily wooded, and it still had some primary forest. So when we had, and we know now that farming came from the continent, so it started in the Far East. There was farming in Europe with the linear bank around about 7,000, 6,000 BC. But there's this kind of hiatus. It stops when it gets to northern France, doesn't really get into Sweden, and it doesn't cross the Channel until about 6,000 years ago. So people came over and they were like, okay, we've got crops and we've got animals, but there's too many trees. So they needed to cut down a lot of trees. And to do that, they quarried axes, they quarried flint axes, they took flint probably from the beach, and they used stone quarries all over the country, often in coastal areas, to get all sorts of different types of stones. But the reason why they wanted to polish the stone is that after they chipped them down, in fact, Jim, do you want to, as the flint expert, stone expert, do you want to talk about how the polishing impacts on the axe use?
Okay. So when you're manufacturing axes, say flint axes, you're knocking flakes off, and you're using the ridges between the flakes as a point to direct the force. So it's really useful when you're actually making the axe. You can kind of control how you thin the piece of flint and how you kind of shape it. But that same ability to direct the force down the ridges left behind by previous flakes is also a weakness when you're actually going to use the axe to chop things. So by polishing the blade, the sort of cutting edge, you're removing those ridges and you're making the axe more resilient so that it won't break when you're using it, or it's less likely to break when you're using it. So initially, a lot of the early ones, they're just polished on the blade edge. And then later on, presumably because they've got a bit more time and a lot less trees to cut down, they start going to town and polishing the thing all over and making it sort of, giving it an aesthetic quality beyond sort of merely functional.
Thank you, Jim. So these axes, they are, they're supposed to be functional, but they're also quite beautiful things in their own right. And some of them have been deposited and they haven't been used at all. And so we think that this kind of utilitarian tool became something else. It became something that perhaps was also about status, and perhaps the different types of stone, which you can often tell by eye, whether it's from the Lake District or the Cornish quarries or from Wales. These became sort of artifacts to talk about things. So if you think about stone in the Stone Age, this is what they were using for everything. Their tools were, that's what it was about. They were experts in stone. So we know that there was a lot of polishing going on, but it's very rare to find a polishing stone in Britain. Now, we use the term polissoir, it's a French word, because there are huge amounts in France. And some of these are quite monumental. If you do a Google search, you'll be able to see some just incredible examples. In Britain, it's not that they're necessarily rare. There's some portable ones, but they're very rare still in the landscape. So many of these polissoirs seem to have been taken out of the landscape and used to build mortuary monuments, the chambered tombs, of the Neolithic, a couple of hundred years after the Neolithic first arrived in Britain. So from about 38,000 BC to about 36,000 BC, these stones were taken out of the landscape and put into monuments. So in England, the only Neolithic polyswar we knew about until we found the one in the in the Valley of Stones was this one in the Avebury landscape. So it was an enormous surprise for us to find one, and that's why it really is a rare form of archaeology in terms of being absolutely where it was used during the Neolithic. Is that good, Hayley? You happy?
Yeah, brilliant, absolutely brilliant. I will just add that we don't expect to find a second one, but if we did, we would be dancing for joy, I think. And we just don't know what we're going to come across in this survey. That's part of the excitement of it. So also on this slide is a Neolithic maul and a Roman quern. Now querns are used for grinding corn. And I will just add here and say that one of our other volunteers, Mervyn, is currently tracking down some examples of querns that were found at Maiden Castle. That when they were originally looked at, it was decided that they definitely couldn't be from a local stone because there was no local pudding stone anywhere to be seen, which of course we know is not true because Maiden Castle isn't very far from the Valley of Stones. So Mervyn's trying to track down these examples and see if, and to see whether they do come from locally or whether the original idea was correct. So, and then to slightly more modern times, Sarsens are also used for building. There's a dovecot here in Avebury. You can see the stones have been shaped and built into a wall. And there are examples closer to home. The churchyard wall in Portersham contains some really big lumps of sarsen, but those haven't necessarily been shaped. But then when you go to Abbotsbury, the curbstones look like they are sarsen too. I mean, it's a really sensible material to build a curbstone out of because when it gets bumped, it doesn't damage. So these are the sorts of things outside of the Valley of Stones that we're thinking about and relating to the landscape. Or I guess it's all part of the bigger landscape. So how are we doing for time? I wonder, it's 10:30, should we just pause for a few minutes, have a shuffle, I might just grab myself a glass of water, and then if we come back after the break, we can then start to talk about the survey itself, and how we're going to do the data collection and sort of tell you about our methods. Back to the Valley of Stones, back to our Sarsens, field survey and data collection. So how are we going to go about this slightly crazy project? There are about, what do we think, 1,500 stones, something like that in the Valley of Stones?
So by aerial recording, they've got 1,500, but we know that there are more. Yeah.
Yes, it's a lot of stones. We've already had one batch of volunteers out before Christmas, or I say out before Christmas. We did the training before Christmas. We were supposed to have a concluding workshop with them this afternoon, so consequently some of them were out just about meeting the deadline I gave them in the snow on Thursday, finishing off. So I don't know how many stones they'd have seen in the snow, but it will be interesting to find that out when we do get to meet up with them. So how are we going to gather data on all of these stones? Right, first things first, health and safety. Like, we apply a common sense, sensible, no pressure approach. So please be sensible when you're out there. Absolutely make sure that someone knows where you're going, and when you expect to return if you're working alone. Ideally, take someone out with you, drag a friend, a partner, a child, a parent, whoever, to go out with you. But if you're not doing that, just let someone know when you're going, and when to expect you back. And if you don't want to say that to anybody else because you think they might ridicule you for going and surveying stones, just drop me a message, it's fine. And I will then start to chase you if you don't tell me that you've got home again. be aware of potential hazards, particularly the weather. As I just mentioned, we've had people out in the snow. But the sea mists in the Valley of Stones can come in, and they can come in quite quickly. Um, so just plan what you're doing, and when you're going, and be aware of what's going on around you. Also, think at this time of year, it gets quite dark quite early. Make sure you leave yourself enough time, um, and just be sensible. So wear appropriate clothing and footwear. There are a lot of trip hazards in the Valley of Stones. Some of the valley sides are quite steep. The grass gets wet, with the additional hazards of large sarsen stones and small sarsen stones dotted around, which then have sort of like ankle breaker gaps between them, some of which will be disguised by long grass. So just be careful. Follow the countryside code, open gates, shut gates, those sorts of things. And then also be mindful of livestock. I actually intended and forgot to stick a photo in. Some of our volunteers who were out just before Christmas said the cows are incredibly relaxed. There are cows in the field. They're not going to bother you. But what they might do is just stand on the stones that you're trying to survey. They couldn't get them to move. They absolutely weren't fussed by the fact that the people were there. Having said that, I personally wouldn't have been going as near to those cows as they did. So if you get there and discover that there are cows sitting on your stones, just come back another time. Enjoy a nice walk instead. I can't think of any other particular health and safety hazards. We also ask you not to damage the stones or dig into or probe around the stones. Don't dig into the ground. The whole area is a scheduled monument, and that means that we're not allowed to disturb the soils. So even though it might be very tempting to prod the ground to try and establish how big the stone actually is, we'd rather you didn't do that, please. Don't start peeling off sort of the lichens and mosses. There are some beautiful mosses on there, and again, the volunteers out before Christmas sent me some lovely photos. They're very pretty. I'm sure some of them are very rare. Dave can probably tell us more about those, but we don't want you to damage them. If we can't see the stone, just write that on your sheet. Just say there's a stone here, but I can't see enough of it to tell you anything about it. That's absolutely fine. Would far rather you did that than disturbed any of the flora and fauna. We also don't want you to detach flakes from the surface of the stone. Don't try and chip a bit off. Yeah, if you can't see, then you can't see, and that's fine. And then yeah, don't climb barbed wire fences or take other unnecessary risks. Just be sensible, which I'm sure you all will be. So, addressing problems with the original survey. So, we are making sure that we provide the training so that hopefully everyone who goes out there will be applying the same standards, and we're keeping quite close tabs on the areas within the Valley of Stones that you're recording. So hopefully we will have a uniform distribution of recording by the end of the project. And I'm about to go through the recording sheets with you. So we've got standardized information, which we will then enter into a big database. So that will help with the analysis afterwards. Oh yes, and the survey areas will be assigned. So it's going to be quite tricky, because I'd expected us to all be in the same room, and I was very much hoping that I could just give you a map, and give you an area which to do. I'm going to have to try and do that now, either by post or by email, and we'll work that out a bit later. But we also don't want you to end up doing the same stones as somebody else. We want to maximise efficiency. So we've got lots of maps to share with you on that side. So yes, we'll assign the areas. Some of these are more densely packed, some of them cover a bigger area, some of them are in the valley bottom, some of them on the valley sides. if you have a preference, let me know. For example, you might not be very keen on climbing halfway up the valley side and dealing with steep slopes. That's fine. If you want somewhere that's closer to a parking area, that's fine. Just let me know. I think at the end of this session, the best thing is to either have a bit of a chat with me or to just drop me an email with any preferences. So I can sort of start to assign and work things out. We expect each survey area to take around 4 hours. I think that's sort of been the volunteers who've been out before Christmas. I think they've been finding that sort of duration. I know a few of them sort of went out one afternoon, did a bit of a recce and a survey to find their stones, then went back a following time, ready to record them. You could attempt to get up in the morning and go and work it all out and just spend one day doing it. It's up to you. Hopefully you can make this work for your personal schedules, and fit it in around other things the rest of your lives. So again, if we were at Gorwell Farm in the barn, I would give you a survey pack, which would have a clipboard, blank recording sheets, the map of the area, and a laminated sort of crib sheet, a filled in recording sheet, with examples of the responses, just to give you an idea and help you fill in the sheets yourselves. And a whistle. We've got some lovely branded Path Participate whistles that are currently sitting behind me in a box. We'll work out ways to get these things to you. But it might also be helpful if you could let me know if you're happy to do some of the printing yourselves rather than me posting all the sheets out to you. I can just send you the digital versions and then you can print everything out for yourselves. But if you can't, that's not a problem. Again, at the end, we can either have a bit of a chat, or we can just email and work this out. We need you to provide a pen. Please use a black biro, black ballpoint pen, no pencils. The reason for that is because the pencils don't last and don't show up on the recording sheets. One of our lovely volunteers from before Christmas, she filled out all the text beautifully in black ballpoint pen, but she'd done all of her lovely sketches in pencil. They were lovely, they were beautiful, but when I scanned them in, I couldn't see them, so I had to go and draw over them with a pen, which I felt a bit bad about doing, but I couldn't see them, and if we can't see them digitally, it means they won't archive and they won't keep. So please use a black pen. You'll need a tape measure, and a camera or a camera phone, so that we can take photos of the stones as well. So this is the area in which we're surveying. This is a map of the Valley of Stones. I don't know whether you, my mouse isn't on. Can you see my mouse?
Yep.
Yep. Okay. So this is where are we? This is the Bishop's Road, which comes down to Gorwell Farm. This is the road to Portisham, and then this is the road that goes off to Winterbourne Abbas, and then this is the one that comes. Actually, no, sorry, I'm confused. This goes to Winterbourne Abbas. This goes to Little Breedy, with Little Breedy Farm down the bottom. The red outlines all the fields, and we've given each field a field number. This map also shows some of the geology, but we've got a better geology map coming up in a minute. What we've done, or what Anne has done, is go out and use our GPS to survey in all of the stones that we can see. Or not all of them, we haven't done all of them yet because there's a lot of them. We're trying to do them in batches to keep our sanity. And you can see the stars here indicate the areas that we've done. So we've done a couple in this field here, some in there, these ones in field 6 have actually all now been surveyed by volunteers before Christmas, and then there's a batch up here as well. And we've broken these down into different areas, and they're the areas of the maps which I'll give you. Is that still making sense so far, Anne? Is there anything else I need to say on that?
No, I think that's fine. I suppose it's just to reiterate, this is why we moved across the valley for particular reasons. So we didn't have everybody, if we'd started at one end of the valley and moved forward, there'd be much more chance of people either missing stones or duplicate recording. But it also means that if you wanted to have a more level place, for example, some of the parts up in field 8 at the top, it's steeper than the other parts of the valley. So and there's a few more areas in field 5. It's just I couldn't squeeze the star on properly. So we kind of dotted it around for that reason. And while we were surveying, so we use the GPS, which has satellites and phone signal, which are both, the satellites normally aren't a problem. It's the phone signal in the valley that can be a problem. And again, that's why we want to make sure that you let people know that you're going to be out, and why we've given you a whistle, which if you were to fall, and somebody might be able to like come and help you up if you were unable to get phone contact. But also, we had problems because of the moisture in the valley. We couldn't get the satellites because the moisture interferes with the signal. So that was a whole new thing. So, as I say, it was a challenging thing to do. And the geologists would never really do this in terms of looking at individual stones like this and mapping them like this on such a large scale, because, often geologists just work on different scales. But we hope at the end of the day that we'll have a really good database of each individual stone that can then be used going forward, by anyone, whether they're lichen specialists or stone specialists or people interested in, if the stones have moved in 50 years, they could tell us. So, yeah, that's all. Yeah.
Thank you for reminding me about the lack of phone signal in various places. I'd forgotten about that, which is daft because it's quite a big problem. Right, let's move on. So this is what our Sarsen recording sheet looks like. So there are some detail that you don't need to fill in, such as the coordinates, because we've recorded things with the GPS. We know exactly what the coordinates are for each stone. And then some of the boxes have prompts to help you fill in details. So you can just circle the things that are relevant, which we hope tries to make it easier for you. Try not to leave blank spaces. You can't be wrong. And try not to do things like write a question mark beside it, because you're the person in the field. You will be the best person to decide what you're looking at. You might be unsure on the first one, but by the time you've done 3, you'll have given yourself a benchmark, and you'll start to be able to to compare. And you can always go back if you want to go back and change something. If you realise that you misunderstood a question, you can go back and change it. But what we need to be able to do with all this data is input it into a spreadsheet that we can then use to analyze and to churn out facts. And that will always remove any uncertainty. So it's much better that when you're in the field, you tell us what you think is true when you're there, than we try and guess from our desks when we're inputting into the database.
And can I just
put
just an extra point? So you should have enough room to write. We don't mind it. We're asking you to do it in pen. We don't mind if you cross out something, you write something next to it. But maybe when you do your primary recording for the first couple, just, be aware you might want to cross it out, so leave space in the box. But as I say, we don't mind if things are crossed through, or you decide to add extra notes. That's fine.
Some of the previous volunteers, I can tell, have done it in pencil, and then gone over it and done it in pen when they're happy with their answers. That's completely fine. If you're printing your sheets out yourself, you can always sort of, redo them. What we don't want you to do is to worry too much about it, and to spend too long umming and ahhing. Once you've sort of started to look at the stones, I think it will all become quite clear. And the sheets that the volunteers from before Christmas have been sending back to me, there have been no problems with them. I know some of them were quite nervous and weren't so sure about what they were doing, had never looked at stones in this detail before, but they all came back with no issues. And I can sort of, roughly look at the photos and ascertain that, yeah, what they're saying looks like it's true. So please don't worry about it. What we don't have here is a copy of the back of the sheet. So on the back of the sheet, there's an area for drawing. But again, don't worry, it doesn't have to be a work of art. We just want to use that to be able to match up your stone with the information you're telling us, with the photo, and the stone actually in the field. The drawings can be really helpful to just explain some of what you've written about. Right. So we'll go through this in a little bit more detail. The project code should be printed onto every sheet already for you, and so should the project name. This is an example of the maps that I'll send out, and I will tell you whether you're doing area 1, area 2, area 25. And I will either put that in the post to you or pop it in an email to you, as we sort of decide what's best for every individual. The field number is the number that's on that map that I showed earlier, the field boundaries that are outlined in red. I will also make sure you've got that written down for you. And then the assigned number. So if I just quickly flip back for a second. So up here, this box here is the assigned number. Now, we need every stone to have its own unique identifying number. We haven't pre-numbered them, partly because we keep finding extras. And if we'd pre-numbered them, we'd end up in a real jumble, because we'd have stone number 527A, 527B, it would just get really complicated. So the assigned number for each stone is something that you are assigning, and it consists of the field number, the area within that field that I give you, and then we're asking you to give each stone a number. So number 1, number 2, number 3. And then what we'll also need you to do is mark on, whether it's the map I give you, or again, some of the volunteers actually sketched out their own maps, where you just show me which stone is which. And then I can go back to our mapping computer programs and number each stone. So everything will be cross-referenced. And then the stone number, we're asking you not to fill that in, because we will do that at the end. We will go through and give every stone its own number. So that's going to be a bit of a challenge when we bring ourselves to do it, but we're hoping that this will work. So just to go back to this slide. So this is the assigned number up here. This is the stone number here. So don't worry about filling that one in.
Hayley, Ross asked if we could read out the squares. I'm not sure if she means that's on the data sheet, the collection sheet.
It's okay, Anne. I just meant what Hayley's doing now.
Oh, right. Okay, no problem.
Okay, good. So I'll keep going, and then I can go back over the sheet, and if there are any bits that I've missed or gaps, you can ask. But again, when I give you your pack, you'll get a sheet that's been filled in that Jim has prepped with model answers, so you can just copy those to get an idea of what you need to do. Right, here's another area. This is field 3. Well, this is part of field 3, and it's got several different areas within it. Some of these I have assigned to volunteers before Christmas. Some of these you guys can do. Interestingly, I'll just point out this circle here. I think this is probably a prehistoric house. So when you're looking at your stones, they're interesting to think about. You know, some of them will have little, you know, you're looking for chips that have been knocked off them and things like that. But some of them are part of bigger structures. Now you can see here how we've divided things up. We've tried to make sure there's no overlaps, but it's quite tricky. So if you can just mark on each area which stones you've actually done, hopefully this is all going to work.
Can I just interject here?
Yes, please do.
The idea is that everybody's got between sort of 15 and 20 stones in each area to look at. One thing that we didn't record with the GPS is a mobile stone. So you will come across some stones that are maybe just sort of cobble size, but they're mobile, they're just on the surface. Other stones that we have recorded and that our recording could be quite small, where there's just there's an embedded stone that's actually just a bit of it is poking through on the surface. So as I say, we're not recording mobile stones, we are recording those embedded stones. Some of them are completely covered in moss, so they're actually quite hard to see until you're right on top of them. And that's again why we haven't given pre-assigned numbers, because you may find a stone extra that we haven't recorded. In which case, if you can draw it on your map, we can go back out with the GPS and spot it in. They're tricksy, those stones.
Yeah, I think we set a limit of 25 centimeters as the sort of minimum size, because you could find molehills with sort of pebbles and things like that, and that way lies madness.
And the project is bonkers enough as it is. So
yeah.
Thank you.
Right. So, geology. The geology in this landscape is not straightforward. Every different bit of the valley is slightly different. You will have a copy of this map in your pack, and on that recording sheet, there is a box for the bedrock geology and a box for the superficial. So you can see on this map, you know, we've overlaid the fields again, so you should be starting to get familiar with how that sort of looks now. But on here, we've then added the underlying bedrock geology, which is marked out by these A's and B's. Most of the sheets I've had come back so far have been the Seaford Chalk Formation and the Lewis Nodular Chalk, but some of you at some point may end up getting some pool formation, although I don't think we've got any areas up here at the moment. And then on top of the bedrock geology, you get your superficial geology, a lot of which is head, which is the sands and gravels, and that is marked out with these slightly sort of the brown colours. If you can try and work out roughly where this is on the map you are and stick that on the sheet, that would be very helpful. This is something that you can possibly try and work out before you head out, rather than standing with too many bits of paper in the field. But you may well find out that you're on boundary areas if you're coming up here. You might need to actually be out there to work out exactly how close you are to things. Now, the box of visibility, as Anne said, some of the stones are quite hard to see. Some of the stones are really rather buried. Please measure the visible length, width and depth. Give us an idea of how much can be seen, because it's helpful for us to guess or to know that there might be a lot more there than there actually is. And if you can stick on your measurements If the stone continues underneath something, then that's really helpful for us to get an idea of what's going on. Some of the volunteers from before Christmas, I know, were trying to do things like poke their tape measures under gorse bushes and into bramble bushes and things. If you want to stick your hand in a gorse bush, go ahead, but I probably wouldn't be. Orientation. So we're looking at the shapes of the stones. Is it horizontal or is it oblique? Is it lying flat? Is it standing on its end? A lot of these stones have sort of slipped down the valley sides naturally. And it's fairly obvious, if they're sitting on the valley side, then they've probably lain there since, that happened naturally under geological processes. If they're suddenly standing up on end, that's an indication that a person has done something to that stone. So it's really helpful for us to know that. Along with the direction of the long axis. So, I mean, some of them are almost as long as they are wide, but if you can give us an indication of whether the long axis is sort of facing northeast, southwest, if you've got a compass to take out with you, then that's great. You might be able to work it out roughly from a map, or lots of mobile phones have got compass apps on them. Although I've never been able to get mine to work very well, so I tend to take an actual compass with me. But you might be able to just work that out from the map. So the shapes of the Sarsen stones. You can see there is 4 different options. Tabular. So they've got roughly parallel upper and lower surfaces. So do they look like a slab? Are they rounded? Are the edges worn? Or are they domed? So some of them sort of look like they're tabular, but then they have raised bits or sunken bits. Or are they completely irregular? This stone at the bottom here is one that is actually from the Kingston Russell Stone Circle, but we've nicknamed it the Turtle Stone. But you can see there's no predictable shape in that at all. It's completely irregular. And then we move on to the types of sarsen. I wondered, Jim, did you want to just go over this bit?
Yeah. So, not expecting you to be too accurate with this. I'm not even a geologist, so I'm but you should get a laminated version of the card at the bottom, which is a geologist grain card, and it gives you an idea of sort of what size particles there are in there. If it's like the saccharoid, the one that's sort of listed as A at the top there, it's just sand. Grains are relatively uniform size. We've found that quite a lot of those from the southwest end of the valley have disappeared. They were favoured by people in the post-medieval period to make things like the curbstones you saw in Abbotsbury, because they uniform, they're easier to dress than sort of the nasty sort of conglomerate with all the lumps in it. And then you've got some bits where it's the interface between the sands and the gravels. So they've got little bits of coarser material in there. So they're down as the sand grains and granules. And then you're into the conglomerate. So it's sort of what you can see in there. Is it angular flint that's been shattered and things like that? Rounded pebbles, and are there any quartz pebbles in there? So the quartz is relatively unusual, but you do get it. So some of the stones down, the 9 stones down at Winterbourne Abbas, the stone circle there has got quartz pebbles in. as I say, don't fret too much about it. But if you see these different things, the card should give you an idea of sort of the size of the particles that you can stick on there, and any extra notes are good. Things like recording quartz pebbles could be useful in the future, because if we don't get many quartz pebbles in the Valley of Stones, but you've got them in the Nine Stones, then you know the Nine Stones have probably come from somewhere else. So that's why recording to this level of detail, because it gives us insights into what stones are going where and how they're moving around. And the reason there are different types of particles in there is because of the, going back to whatever it is, 55 million years ago, different bits of this huge river are chucking out different material at different times. So it's sort of it's hardly a smoking gun 55 million years later, but it gives us insights into how stones moving around the landscape in prehistory. I think that's
Thank you. One thing to just check, Jim, from some of the surveys that have been coming back from the guys before Christmas.
Yep.
If it's option A, only sand grain visible.
Yep.
Presumably it can't be any of the other options.
No.
But if it's B, it can also be C.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
Just double checking for my own reference there. And then of course the banded or the mixed composition. Those of you that go out and see the banding, it's quite interesting and it's quite unusual, I think, to look at stones that have got layers of different things in them. Oh, sorry,
Yep.
There's a picture of the banding.
Effectively, what that is in geological terms is you've got this huge river, and at various points there are floods and the river channel moves. So when you've got the big bits of gravel there, that's kind of near the center of the channel and it's high energy environment. And then there'll be a flood and the river channel will move, and it suddenly find itself, the areas right at the edge of the channel, less energy, and it's only dropping out sand grains instead. So actually that interface between the two bits marks a sort of a big flood event or some sort of thing like that. So that's why you're getting these things layered up in different sort of, like a cake. It's sort of geological stratigraphy rather than archaeological stratigraphy, but it's basically it's different sort of events within the river catchment.
But they can also be really useful for looking at the orientation of the stone. You can imagine if that was stone on its end, and those bands were running up and down. That really isn't a natural way for them to be lying. So gives us clues to think about what's happened to the stones. So here we go, the back of the recording sheet. So the box evidence for use, none. A lot of the stones, a lot of the sheets I've had back so far do say none on them. That's completely okay. There are a lot of stones in the valley and most of them haven't been touched and haven't been used. And then it says, they say southwest end is partially buried in hillside. That's a really useful thing to know. You might want to say, however, that it's been chipped, or all sorts of other things. We'll go on to look at those in the next slide in a minute. Archaeological features and interpretation. So if you can see anything around that you think might be relevant to that stone, anything nearby, or any ideas you've got as to how that stone might have been used in the past, just stick it in that box. And then at the bottom, a quick sketch of the stone. You can see it just needs to be a really rough outline, just to give us a rough indication of the shape and the dimensions, preferably which way north is. This is to help us if we ever do need to go back or to match up the stones with the photos. And you can also use this to highlight any features that are there. You know, if there's a hole in it, if that's been drilled by someone, you know, it's helpful to just show which end of the stone it is, that kind of thing. So examples of evidence of use. So this, where's my mouse gone? Sorry. Right, this stone over here, flake removal. You can see here, I hope you can see my mouth, is a rather flat end where a chip has been taken off. And along here as well, that's a suspiciously straight edge. You can see the rest of the stone is all sort of fairly rounded, knobbly, bobbly. And suddenly you've got these straight edges. Flakes have been knocked off that stone. Where they've gone, we don't know, but it's really helpful to know that that's happened. Sarsens, despite being very hard, you know, can be shaped. So you might see evidence of that. You also might see evidence for splitting of stones. This is a photo taken by Katie Whittaker, not in the Valley of Stones, but of Sarsens elsewhere. And if you look here, you can carefully see, sorry, if you carefully look here, you can see little circular holes. This is where a charge has been put into the stone, and you can then see that the stone, the big stone, has actually been split into 3 different parts. What's on my next slide? No. So some of the stones in the valley look like they have been split. You might not see evidence of those little circles, but you can see where the stones have kind of come apart from each other. Another real clue for looking at that is around the stones, sometimes you can see a gully has been dug. And the reason for that is that they would sort of try and loosen it from the earth. So before splitting it, they want to loosen it from the earth so that it splits along its natural lines, and isn't bound by the soil. So if your stone is sitting in a gully, or a little pit, that might indicate that they were going to try to split it or take it away, and then didn't. Or it might be that they left part of the stone and there's another bit of it missing. So just look carefully and see if there are any kind of straighter edges, or things that look suspiciously unnatural. Some of the Sarsen boulder stones have been modified. So the polissoir has its lovely smooth area. One of the other stones the volunteers have just sent back, and I'm sorry I haven't put pictures of all these in, but they only came in during the week, so I've had a chance to look at them, but not do much more with them. One of the stones has got a polished area on it, where to me it looks like a cow's been scratching its bottom. But it could also be that people have been walking over to it and touching it. Something has caused, it's a conglomerate and it's got the flint in it, and something has caused them to smooth off and be rounded and shiny. On the group chat, someone else suggested that in the Avebury landscape there are similar stones that have got these smooth areas. Is that where someone's put rope on them and tried to drag them? I suspect not, partly because they're so smooth. That's taken a lot of repeated touching, which is why I think the most likely answer is a cow scratching its bottom, because they just stand there and scratch and scratch and scratch. But without looking in more detail at exactly where the stone is, I need to bring up their records and spend a bit of time looking at them. But if we start to find lots of evidence of smoother stones across the landscape, you know, what does that mean? It will be interesting to see. But you might also find stones that have got holes in them, that have been shaped, that have been used for things. If you happen to spot a fence post or a gate post that's Sarsen, we may well have not recorded that one at all with the GPS. So do let us know. You might find something that's looks like it's been used as a quern or something like that. Stick all this on your sheet. So additional notes, anything else of interest, stick it down, give us the sketch. And like I say, you can do it with a pencil initially and go over it if you want to. And then make sure that, yes, we know where the stones is. So if it's an additional stone, add it to your plan. Do a little mini plan on the sheet here, something like that. And then please take a photo. Now, the photos is something else that we need to make sure matches up with the sheets and with the stones. There's a little mini scale bar that will be in your pack, so I can either post it out to you or you can print it out for yourselves. I've laminated the ones that we've got here, and I'm very happy to post them out if you want, but if you can print them, that's good. So I will email you a more detailed version of this slide, because we need to make sure that all the survey forms and all the photographs are labelled so that we can match everything up. And it's a real pain if I have to relabel all the file names. And then ideally you would use WeTransfer to send us all your data, send the photos, send scans of your sheets. But rather than going into too much detail about that now, you'll probably find it much easier just to read my guide when it comes to it, when you're ready for that stage. If I try and give it to you now, you'll go out in the field and forget all about it by the time you come back anyway. Is there anything else you want to say, Jim, on photographs?
No, I don't think so. I mean, not expecting sort of anything that's, publication standard or anything like that. Largely, again, it's another way of checking if we need to go back out and look at the stone again, which stone it is. Generally, I wouldn't zoom in too much, provide a little bit of context around it so we can kind of see how it fits with maybe neighbouring stones and things like that. But, make it obvious which stone it is you're taking a photo of as well. So sort of centre it in the picture. But yeah, don't think there's any wrong way of doing it. It's just sort of basically to give you an idea of which stone it is. If, of course, you've noticed anything on there, like there's the sort of holes in there for fixing charges or putting wedges in to split the stone, then you can do a close-up of that as well. That would be quite useful. That's about it, really, I think.
What we don't want is lots and lots and lots of different photos that show the same thing. We're quite mindful of our data storage. So just one photo of each stone, with, yeah, like Jim said, if there's detail that you want to show us, then that's really helpful. But we don't need the same a photo from the north, from the south, from the east, and from the west, for example. Just one photo of each stone would be good. Just pick the best angle. Think about the sun as well and the shadows. But that, hopefully that will work, and hopefully you've all got phones or cameras that will enable you to do that fairly easily.
If I can just follow up, yeah. So when Jim's saying, if you notice any of these archaeological marks, that may be the subject of a later project when we say, oh, right, these are the stones that we need to look at in more detail. And at that point, we'll go out and probably take a lot more stones and do a more detailed level of recording. So at this stage, it's the kind of the meta picture, if you like. And then that'll help us build up a better understanding more fully going forward.
I mean, it may be helpful to know that as far as we can tell at the moment, the sort of main area where there's stoneworking going off in the post-medieval period is sort of towards the southwestern end of Field 8, which is the main Sarsen train there, but that sort of area around there. Yeah, thank you, Hayley.
Yeah.
So yeah, they seem to be working that end, and presumably they're taking the stones up onto Bishop's Road, and from there they can take them to places like Portisham, Abbotsbury, wherever they've got a market for it. Be interesting if we find that they're doing that anywhere else in the valley, but it does seem to be at that end at the moment. But that's one of the points of doing this survey, is to find out whether we can sort of see trends and patterns in how they're using the stones in the past.
Yeah, and interestingly, so a lot of those are happening in the bottom of the valley at Field 8. Where we've surveyed, there seem to be sort of linear rows of stones going up. So, you know, we can see some sort of form. Some of these things might be natural. Some of the stones might be moved in particular ways, you know, as they're taking stones out of the valley, for example. But again, getting all the data together is going to be really helpful for that.
We're just about coming to the end of everything, but just, and I will quickly flick back to the last slide, but just while we're on this map, I just thought I'd point out, because I think I forgot to say it earlier, about parking and when you're out there, and how to access the Valley of Stones. So where are we? Right, this is the road from the main road down to Portisham. This is the little side road that goes off to Little Breedy. There is parking down here by Little Breedy Farm. There is a little tiny sort of verge you can park on. I don't know if you can actually make out that there are a couple of houses down there. And we were all fine, and it was all great and nice and easy for parking, until they started to redevelop one of the houses, and they've knocked it down and they're rebuilding it. And when I was last down there, they had some really big lorries coming in and out. So just double check if you want to park down there. It should be completely fine, and I've spoken to them. But just double check that they've not got any lorries due on the day that you're coming. Another area for parking is up in this corner up here. On the junction, there's spaces you can pull off the road here and here. And there's a gateway you can access through. So there are public footpaths coming from this end and this top corner. There's also a gate somewhere along here. I can't remember exactly where it is.
Closer to where the A is,
the
sort of near the crossroads, but where the boundary is, just about there, yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay, so there is a gate there. And then when you enter, there are marked footpaths, public rights of way. There are also lots of routes that people have walked and the cows have walked, that I recommend you using rather than just striding off across the field, of course, until you get to your area, and in which case you may well then have to divert from the footpaths. But hopefully that it is not the most easiest place to access, I'm afraid. It is a bit of a challenge, and particularly knowing that in various points there's no phone signal. It's worth just, planning your trip out. Right, I will just skip back to the last slide. So that's all about data. And oh yeah, that's it. So that's pretty much it. So there are a couple of slides here about further reading, which you're never going to sit and write down now. I will circulate this the presentation along with the video so that you can take all this reading if you want. Or I can just stick particular things of interest into an email for you. I think I might just stop sharing my screen for now. Do you have any questions?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, go for it, Ros.
The one thing I wasn't clear on. So when you're talking about the photos, you put the field number, the second number, and then the number of the stone. But I think you said earlier not to give the stones a number.
Yeah. So when we need you to number the stones within your area. So, you know, when the first stone that you survey, you will give it your field number, your area number, and then stone number 1. And then stone number 2, stone number 3. On the recording form, there is a box that says stone number on it. That's a box that we will fill in at a later date. You need to put your number into the box that says assigned number.
Okay.
Because you're assigning it basically. So the final stone number it'll be one continuous run of numbers from however many stones we've got, 2,000. So it'll be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Okay, so each of us will have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then you give them overall a number afterwards.
Yeah.
So okay, that's clear. Thank you.
The assigned number is your is for your area, the stones you're surveying.
Yeah, and matches the photograph number.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No, thanks for clarifying. So we did have a pilot project last summer with people who went out and sort of tested the recording forms before we rolled it out. And then we do have, because we've got different forms of data for the stones in the valley, we've got some work that Historic England have done on the aerial mapping. And we've got some other work that's been done with the GPS. And those two, they're not quite compatible with the location. And that's just to do with the ways that it was taken. So yeah, we spent a really long time trying to figure out the least complex way to do it. So actually you doing it this way, it will require you all thinking about it. But actually I think once you get in the swing of it, it's going to be fine. And then it will all, you know, provide a really good framework for wider data. And that's always the difficulty with any sort of project, is making sure that you've got an eye on the output at the end. So that's
also worth pointing out, the reason that we're getting you to do it this time of year is not because we're sadists and we like sort of people getting hypothermia or anything like that. It's just that even when we did the pilot survey in the summer, the vegetation is too long to see the stones, and it's only in the sort of window between the middle of December and early March that the grass is down far enough and all the other things are dead enough that you can kind of get in and see what you're looking at. Unfortunately, we learned that when we did the first Sarsen survey we did up on Tennant's Hill, because we're actually looking at clearance. People have moved in the past, have moved all the stones into the hedge bottom. So we needed all the nettles and brambles and things to have died down. So we apologise for making you go out in the dead of winter and you know, the snow and the ice and all those things that's happening at the moment. But it is kind of, there is a logic to it, rather than getting you to wander around in a field of waist-high grass that you can't see anything in. It's
except for cowpats. The volunteers in the pilot established that all they could see was the cowpats on top of the grass and they couldn't see the stones underneath. So hopefully you'll avoid that problem. Now, any other questions on filling in the sheets or data collection or anything like that? You're absolutely welcome to email me questions, ping the group. The WhatsApp group I've added you all to still contains all the volunteers who've been doing the survey before Christmas. So if you've got any questions, they are probably, especially practical ones about parking or access, they are probably much better placed to answer some of those questions than I am. So feel free to just ask. They've all been very friendly and helpful so far.
And it is due to warm up next week.
hooray!
Yeah.
I know. I mean, this winter we had to cancel the first workshop we had to do online because of the snow at Galwell, and then obviously
high winds.
Yeah, sorry.
The high winds. It was the high winds.
Oh, it was the high winds too. And then of course, yes, we were worried about people travelling, and then this time just even trying to get down into Galwell would have been challenging. So yeah, it's certainly a winter, this one.
I can't even get out of Sheffield, let alone get to Galwell. So
yeah.
Right. I think I know we've all been sitting here for quite a long time staring at our screens. I'd quite like to just say a couple of minutes about what from here. In that ideally you will go out, do your survey, and then email me or WhatsApp me, and not WhatsApp me, we transfer me your data, and then we've got a date which I currently can't. Is it 13th of February?
It's the
15th of
15th.
February. I'll email it out to you all, where we've got the barn booked at Gorwell again, where we can have a kind of a big concluding workshop where, providing I've got the data, we'll give you a quick summary of what we found, how far we've covered, and that's a chance to hand back over your paper sheets. Or if you don't want to use WeTransfer, we can bring a USB stick and transfer photographs and things like that. So it would be great if you could come to that as well, just to sort of like a concluding workshop, basically, to round things off. But hopefully, do communicate with me between now and then. Please don't just feel like we're sending you out into the ether, into the cold, snowy Valley of Stones, while we're just sitting here waiting for you to get back to us. We're going to be out and about as well, in our woolly jumpers.
Is it in the morning, the workshop?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, 10 o'clock, I think I said. I think I usually say 10 o'clock.
Yeah, so I went out with our colleague Dave to GPS in these stones. So we did 600, we recorded 600 in a week. But I think a lot of those stones will have ended up being recorded by the end of this session, the end of the 2 weeks. So we had that kind of, the miserably cold weather in November doing that. So, and again, usually it's easier again to see the stones. So we'll be planning on another week doing that, I think, quite soon, maybe just after the next workshop. So we're ahead. And I think, as Jim said, we do have this in June that the grass was particularly high, but because cattle are in, they can obviously reduce the level of the grass and the vegetation. So we may be able to run this again throughout at least the spring, perhaps, and maybe we can start it a little bit earlier. Now we know how much the grazing affects it. Up on the top on Tennant's Hill, we really did need to wait for these very cold months, but we might be able to extend the season of recording because we've got an awful lot to do there.
We're kind of dependent on the grazing pattern because it's a national nature reserve. They don't have cattle in there all the time in all the areas, so our hands are tied a little bit there, dependent on what Natural England want to do in the landscape.
Yeah.
Right. Are there any other questions from anybody? Are you all feeling happy about that, or are you terrified? Oh, there's a thumbs up. That's good. A thumbs up and a laugh I can see. That's
Good.
all. That's all good. I can't actually see many faces at the moment. My screen is.
Yeah. You can't go wrong, basically. I mean, we're happy with, if there's anything you're not sure about, do get back in touch. There are no wrong answers. They're stones at the end of the day. They've been there a very long time. If there's any doubts, just flag it up and we can go and have a look.
Yes, and if you the offer it was a long story finding the polissoir, but we were doing the Sarsen survey, and I offered a bottle of whiskey for anyone that found a polissoir, thinking I'd never have to pay it out. And actually, it was Jim that got it. Obviously, if we find another one, we'll be very happy, and I think Natural England would love it if we found another one. So yeah, keep your eyes peeled. See what you can see. So I don't think there are any in the ones that I've recorded, or I hope not. I hope I haven't recorded one and missed it. But yes, if you happen to see anything that looks suspicious, do take a photo of that and flag it up, but separate to the recording.
A sort of clue towards if you're going to find a polissoir, it's going to be the saccharoid, the smooth sandy stuff. They're not going to use the pebbly material because it would just sort of scour out the axis. So There you go. There's a polissoir spotter's guide to.
Jim, of course, is the expert now.
Yeah.
Country's expert. There you go.
So I've just remembered, because we're not at Gorwell Barn, I now need to work out how to get all the forms and things to you. So if everybody could drop me an email to say if there's any particular areas they would rather do or not do, if you want to avoid the steep slopes, that's completely fine, let me know. But if you could also let me know whether you'd prefer me to post you the forms or whether you're happy to print them out, that would be great. What I might do, is anyone hoping to head out tomorrow? If anyone had scheduled it in their diary to head out tomorrow, I can fairly quickly turn you around and email you something across. Otherwise, I might leave it till Monday. But I can then email out all the forms, all the documentation. You can then review it, and then get back to me with whether you want to print it out yourself or for me to put it in the post. I think that might be best. If you're all sort of happy to wait for Monday. I could do it now, but I can actually hear my children banging at the door, and I'll end up missing things if I can't do it when I can concentrate. But if anyone wants to head out tomorrow, I can prioritise you and get that sorted. Hopefully that's okay for everyone. But yeah, if you just ping me a message or WhatsApp and email, you've got all my details now. Hopefully that all makes sense. I can't see anyone who's looking completely in despair, so that's a good sign. Yeah, I think maybe we should leave it there then. If you've got anything else to say, Anne and Jim?
Nope.
No, that's good. All right, thank you very much, everyone, for coming along. Sorry it's not in person. We do still have a batch of biscuits that hopefully we can crack open at Gorwell next month. So yeah, that's, some nice Christmas ones, some of those chocolatey ones too. So yeah, to wait
something
for
to look forward to. Motivation for getting it done and making it to our final final workshop. Right, well,
Brilliant.
thank you everyone for joining us. And good luck surveying.
Yeah. Bye.
Thanks. Nice to see you all.
Bye.
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 So